Today we have moved inside to brew a partial mash and a partial grain amber ale. As you can see, the grain bills are already pre-milled. The grain bills are almost identical to the amber ale and American amber ale kits that we have on our website. They're slightly modified so that we could work with the grains that we had on hand. And we're going to brew them separate from one another. One is a partial mash where we're going to steep the malts, and the other partial grain where we're going to use the brew in a bag option and do a full mash. This is our equipment setup for today. It's very basic. We have two 6 to 8 gallon brew kettles. This one has a false bottom in it. I prefer not to scorch my bags and leak the grain bill everywhere into the water. And once I steep the partial mash, I will transfer the wort into my brew kettle so I can get the boil going on that batch, and then I will return to this brew kettle again with the false bottom on it. The false bottom doesn't fit in both kettles, unfortunately, and I will do the longer brew in a bag mash so I can get full conversion of the malts that we're working with. Then I'll use this brew kettle to do the boil for the second batch. Both the partial mash and partial grain brewing processes require the use of enzymes. Due to the shorter steeping time and that you're not doing a full mash with the partial mash process, there's definitely some argument to be made of how effective the use of enzymes are, how much conversion that you'll even get, which will probably be very minimal, and what benefit the additional cost of the enzymes may have on the final beer product. I would say anything that can improve the final beer is worth the time and effort. With the brew in the bag method that we're using for the full mash, as we've recommended on our blog and on our website, we're using about twice as much of the enzymes that we would for a normal mash, and we're doing that because of the dilute mash conditions the brew in the bag method requires. We go into a lot more detail on our blog. Anthony from Texas is one of our brew in the bag customers that has done a lot of record keeping of his brewing process and has shared that with other gluten-free home brewers so that they can improve their method, and he's kind of confirmed the requirement to use a higher amount of enzymes in the dilute mash conditions of the brew in the bag method. Our plan is to brew the partial mash and partial grain beers using identical grain bills and ingredients, and actually relatively similar brewing methods. We're not using a mash tun in the partial grain version today. Then we'll meet up in a few weeks and we're going to pour the beers and compare how they look, the mouthiness to it, the head retention, how malty the beer tastes, give some kind of comparisons of the differences that the additional steps of the partial grain process will attribute to the final beer. We do know that because you are getting some conversion out of the partial grain method, that we're going to use less sorghum, so there'll definitely be less sorghum required in that final beer product, and that will definitely affect the final beer profile, flavor profile, and we'll make some decisions or compare some notes and see which one suits our taste buds. As far as the tomatoes in the background in this shot, we are not using tomatoes in this brewing process. We're shooting in my kitchen today, and they happen to be on my counter from my garden, so you get to enjoy looking at those while we film this section. See you in a few weeks. Before we fast forward a few weeks through the fermentation process and the bottling process, we wanted to show you this trick that we came up with many years ago when we were working with chestnut chips before the availability of the millet and rice and buckwheat malts. It's probably not the most original idea, but we do a lot of canning, so we had some extra canning baskets. And when you're working with a small amount of malt, like a 6-pound grain bill, you can very easily suspend the grain in the bag and safely suspend it over the wort for the sparge process. This is probably a safer recommendation than some other methods we've used in the past that probably wouldn't pass the muster of our insurance policy. One thing that I will forewarn you about is that not all canning baskets are created equally. This one, for example, I'll turn it on its side so you can see it. It actually has these little notches in there. When you're canning, that's great because it keeps the glass jars from touching each other and possibly breaking. This canning basket, I don't know if it's older or just not as sophisticated, but it doesn't have those notches, so I don't have to worry about setting the grain bag in there and possibly ripping the bag or something. Also, you'll notice on this example here, the opening of the brew kettle is a little bit more narrow than the other basket, so the canning basket kind of just gets stuck at the top. This brew kettle has a larger opening. The basket properly fits in the brew kettle. But by doing so, the basket actually hangs pretty far into the brew kettle. Depending on the level of wort you have in the brew kettle, it may not function to suspend the grain bag above the wort line. So what we've actually done a few times in the past is to actually take pliers and pop these sides off and just flip them around so that you can invert the whole basket and hang it. I obviously didn't do it just now, but what it would do is it would invert the basket and the bottom would become the top, and it would actually suspend the grain bag a little bit higher, so hopefully it's above the line of the wort, and then you can sparge your grains at that point. So just a tip that we wanted to throw out there. May not be the greatest tip, but we thought it'd be worth a few seconds of your time. See you in a few.